Forest Historic Preservation Commission. Commission's before you tonight to work together with all of you, property owners, neighbors, architects, to continue that tradition that was established nearly 40 years ago in this community. That tradition is a review process that allows community members to work together to preserve the qualities and unique character that make Lake Forest a special community. The City of Lake Forest is committed to conducting open and democratic meetings. To achieve that goal, meeting procedures have been adopted by the Commission, and a copy of the procedures is available at the back of the room on each agenda. As always, it's the intent of the Commission to help manage the development and the growth of the City of Lake Forest with a keen sense of preserving the historic structures and open space in the city for all its present and future residents. Our goal is to move each petition before us tonight through the review process as quickly as possible while balancing the interests of the petitioners, neighboring property owners, and the larger community. So we'll start this evening, as we always do, with the introduction of the commissioners.
Jim Preschlack.
Susan Athenson.
Kurt Pairitz.
Fred Moyer.
Mary Ellen Swenson.
And I believe we have some meeting minutes from our previous meeting. Agenda somewhere here. So I wonder if anyone has any comments or corrections, or if there's a motion for those meeting minutes.
I have some items.
All right.
Yes, on the minutes, I see the pages are not, yes, they are numbered. Page 9, they are numbered, I'm sorry. The third from the bottom paragraph, in the last sentence, he commented that changing grade will change the view from the streetscape. And I would ask that it be inserted, comma, essentially reducing the height of the building, comma, and subtracting from its, oh, I lost my writing here, second. It's in, oh, and then it continues, subtracting from, it's in that character is already there. So the insert would be after streetscape, comma, essentially reducing the height of the building, comma, and subtracting from its character, period. Delete and openness makes an important statement at the entry. He stated that an entrance is important for any building, and particularly important for a church. That was that item. And then on page 21, bear with me, a few things there on the, again, third from the last paragraph. There's a sentence in the middle, second sentence, which, excuse me, third sentence. He suggested that consideration be given to placing the sign in the same plane as the wall, insert, and position it within the window area centered with the arch, period. I then said, Moyer further stated that the design of the arch in the tower did not anticipate the placement of a sign next to it and did not allow it to be successfully accomplished, period. Then in the second sentence, after he added that modification, some modification to the colors, insert, incorporating green around the perimeter would help to, and then continue the sentence, reflect the character of Market Square, but, inserting, but would not overcome other objectionable features, period. Then in the next to last sentence in that same paragraph, he stated support for a dark green color, insert, consistent with others in the square, period. And that is the extent of my comments.
Maybe, Fred, we can hand Megan those pages if you want. I think that'd be helpful for her.
You can read my writing.
Yeah, I think she can.
I have trouble reading it myself.
Actually, I was following it quite well. So, any other comments to the meeting minutes? All right, I'll ask if there's a motion to approve them.
So moved.
All right, the motion's been made with the qualifications that Fred has asked for from Commissioner Athenson. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Commissioner Preschlack. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, and any opposed? I think we're fine, so we can put those in the record with those clarifications. That was a lengthy set of meeting minutes. Thanks for reading those, actually, Fred. It's difficult sometimes to paraphrase exactly the spirit of what the conversation is, so I think staff does a nice job on that one, but there's always something that can be added to the translation. Seem to have... All right, the first petition this evening is a continued consideration of the request for a certificate of appropriateness for awning and wall signage for one of the ones that we were just talking about. This is the business at 270 Market Square, Jolly Good Fellows. So if you want to come on up and give us your update, appreciate it.
I'm here as the owner to present the revised sign plan for the new shop Jolly Good Fellows at 270 Market Square. And this is just a summary of what I'm presenting. I have carefully considered all of your suggestions from the February meeting and made revisions to my plan based on those comments. I will keep my presentation to a minimum, which I'm sure you're thankful for, so that I can answer all of your questions. I'll start with the south-facing facade, which would be the upper left-hand corner, the window to the west. I've changed the color of the awning to the fabric awning to the Lake Forest solid green. The loose valance will have 4-inch white script, Jolly Good Fellows, and the window below will have 6-inch white script with descriptive words that will read cupcakes, confections, frozen yogurt, and espresso. On the window just to the east of it, right next to it, that's the upper right-hand corner. The mullion just below the transom window will have 6-inch painted wooden pin mount letters in script Jolly Good Fellows. The photo in the left-hand corner is just around the corner. It is east-facing. And that window, we have also proposed 6-inch wooden pin mount letters on the mullion just below the transom with descriptive words, cupcakes, frozen yogurt, and confections. The final component I'm proposing is a new board sign. The design inspiration was taken from the board signs on the south side of Market Square. The sign would be constructed from solid wood, hand-carved and painted shaw green with white lettering, and a simple cupcake graphic. The top of the sign will be hung 13 feet 3 inches. This is consistent as it is the same height as the reference board signs on the south side of Market Square. The board sign will be centered with the stone column that is just below, and the top of the sign will be aligned with the bottom of the balcony, just to the right. The mounting hardware would attach in the mortar joints only. The intricate detail carved in the wooden frame was inspired from photos of the existing board signs. Upon approval, we would go up on a ladder and make a template of the exact board sign across the street and mimic that for my sign. We would use the same depth, length, and width of the large oval and add a second tail to create the symmetry. The board sign will not set a precedent as it is a common sign already in the square. I've created a balance with the signage on the north and south tower of the square. The board sign is used on the east facade of building to announce my presence as opposed to a projection sign that would be visible from the east. And I've included the common name of the business on this facade. The traditional Lake Forest Shaw blue-green is used prominently on the board sign, as opposed to my logo colors to avoid a look that is too fun or similar to Coney Island. The graphic on the logo is smaller than the 15% allowed in the guidelines. My total proposed signage is 20.41 square feet, which is within the ordinance. I believe I was able to take each of your comments, and I've successfully amended my request to fit the criteria while staying within Lake Forest signage ordinance. I believe that the board sign would be a beautiful addition to Market Square, and it will fit seamlessly with the architecture and original signage from 1917.
Thank you. All right, do we have a report from staff?
Thank you, Chairman Pairitz. The Historic Preservation Commission has the opportunity to review signage requests that are unique and that do offer for some deviation from what might be there today or from what the ordinance, strict read of the ordinance allows for. In this case, the petitioner is looking for signage to really highlight the space for her business. The corner unit in Market Square is a unique space. It has two facades, it has arched windows. All of Market Square is really a playful area. There's a lot of balance, but not necessarily symmetrical elements within the square. The petitioner has looked closely at the different individual components of the request and has made modifications to be more consistent with the design guidelines for Market Square. The size of the letters on the awning being 4 inches, the size of the letters on the window being 6 inches, those are all consistent with the guidelines that are in place for Market Square. The lettering on the wood mullion proposed at 6 inches is consistent with what has been there in the past. The previous tenant had 6-inch letters, so this would be a consistent change with what was there before. When you look at it all together, the size of the proposal, including the board sign, is in compliance with the size requirements for square footage. The element that I think provoked the most discussion at the last commission meeting was the projecting sign that was proposed. It did have multiple colors. It was a new signage type for Market Square. And I think the commission really directed the petitioner to look for something that wasn't going to set a negative precedent in the square. The information that's been provided to the commission does represent the thoughtfulness that has been put into the project, taking cues from existing elements in Market Square, adding to the playfulness that's there. I think those are all positive elements of this proposal, and the recommendation this evening is to support the request. Hopefully all the commissioners were able to review the mock-up that was installed over the weekend. I think that does help show how the proposed board sign will play with the rest of Market Square. Commission comments on the appropriateness of that type of sign, the size of the sign, the location of the sign. I know the petitioner has thought through how that's placed, how high it is, where it is on the archway. And I'm sure she's happy to answer questions about that. But at this point, I would be happy to answer questions that you have for staff, but we are recommending approval.
Okay, thank you. So I do have one question. Is there an element of this request that does not require an approval? I mean, what exactly are we approving, or is there only one part of this that is that would not have, I mean, for example, is it the wall sign that is specifically out of the bounds of what is just allowed by staff approval?
There are a couple new elements that are being proposed for this request. The awning is a new element that is being added to the storefront, and then the board sign is another additional component that's being added to the building. So I think both of those are certainly pieces that would spark commission review. The use of text on the window and on the mullion, I think those are very much consistent with with the ordinance and guidelines.
Okay, so I just need to, for my own, you're adding an awning. Is there not an awning on that same window on the other side of the square? Is that,
There's not an awning on the window that's proposed for this storefront.
okay?
On the other side of the square,
It's a different setup.
that's a good
Well,
question. It's a
I'm just
different,
wondering,
it's a
you know,
different layout.
It's not my expectation that every sign that goes up in Market Square would be reviewed by the commission, so I'm trying to understand if there's a specific element of this request that we would or wouldn't have acted on. Maybe we're just seeing it all because it was,
It's a proposal in whole. So
Okay.
the commission is looking at it as a whole proposal.
we are
but-
too, I just ask. Thanks, Megan.
Hey, Megan, I have a question. I think Commissioner Travers had mentioned some concerns around the seating just to the west of the entrance and the doorway. And I was just curious if you had thought through those dimensions, and is that all, y'all comfortable with that? And because he's not here, I just thought I'd raise it and ask the question.
Yes, and we've spoken with the petitioner, and she understands the concerns, and the zoning does allow for outdoor seating.
Yeah.
So we do monitor those situations, and if problems arise, we work with tenants and property owners to bring a situation into conformance.
Thanks.
All right, any other questions or comments for staff or the petitioner?
I have a question for Mrs. Fellows. So thank you for taking all our comments into, I can see you really looked at all of them. Yeah, you did. And I have a question about the awning, because I was the one that suggested that you make it retractable. I just want to make sure, so the ends are open, right, of your awning?
Yes,
They're not
I'm
closed.
proposing them open because I feel like it would look better with what's on the street.
Right.
They're all open on my side of the
Mhm.
street. I wouldn't care if it was open or closed from my standpoint.
No, no, that's what I'm
I
wondering.
posted it that way because
Yeah.
I thought it would look better.
Yeah, I think it would look, and that's
But-
my concern, is I want to make sure it looks consistent if you're going to leave it open most of the time. And I understand because of your chocolates in the window. So I just want to make sure it looks consistent, because a lot of those are closed and sometimes they're open, but you want to make sure they're the same profile as all the rest of them.
Just this.
Okay, and then,
Nothing.
you're only proposing one board sign on that corner, right, not two?
Yes, just one.
And I have to say, I think it does look a little bit more successful in terms of limiting the colors. It blends a little bit better. But I was just wondering in terms of the height. You know, it seems on that side, there's no pedestrian level sign. And I'm just wondering if you feel that might be, after seeing the mock-up, I wasn't able to see the mock-up, but from looking at this, I'm wondering if it's too high for pedestrian level.
It didn't seem to be. The signs that are on the other side of the street, that are the board signs, that I took this architectural detail from, are hanging at that exact height. I measured all of them, and then I marked it out on the wall, and I'm sure there's a reason for that. It is the same height as the bottom of the balcony. On my side of the street, the facade is about 10 inches lower. On the south side of the street, their board signs almost raise that first floor facade by a slight bit. So it's very in line if you look architecturally from the side when it was up. If you looked kind of down the line, it lines up with other elements and features on the street at that level. That's why I put it.
Okay.
We did put it down on the stone area, and it did not, it wasn't favorable in that position. You couldn't really read it, there, especially if there were cars there, you couldn't see it. It was very hidden and it looked out of place.
Do you have a sign on the door, a window decal on the door then?
Well, my door is you can't see it unless you're standing in front of it because it's underneath the overhang in the corner. And my storefront is the only location that has the door is completely hidden. I think the other location across the street, they actually moved their door to the front when renovations were made, and that was never done in my space. So it's very hidden and out of the way. It will have, probably just a very simple Jolly Good Fellows on it, but you won't be able to see it if you're walking by. You'd have to be standing almost opening it to see it.
Okay. Oh, I like the details you put in there from the other signs across the street. Very Shaw-like. Thank you.
And we will copy that exactly. I will make sure that you do.
Thanks. That's all my questions.
Thanks. Fred?
Deliberation or comment?
Sure, comment and deliberate, or ask a question that sounds,
All right.
deliberate that sounds like a question.
I don't know if it's question time or comment.
It's
time.
question time, but, you know, you can.
Well, I don't know how to phrase this. I want to first speak to the fact, I think this tower is really quite iconic. The downtown Lake Forest area is symbolic even, and the fact that it's not like the other tower. For one reason, it gets light. It gets east, south, west light. It's illuminated during the day, and the closest analogy I can think of, it's Lake Forest version of the Washington Monument. And so I think that the first floor occupancy of what is essentially a 4 to 5 story high element doesn't open the door to put a sign on the tower, but it belongs to the tower when it's on the surface of the tower. And the equivalent would be if there was a coffee shop put in the Washington Monument, I don't think they would be allowed to put a sign on the Washington Monument saying coffee shop. And I think that's the equivalent of what's happening here. There is a symmetry, excuse me, a repetition of the arch as it turns the corner from the south to the east side, with the window centered above it with a little balcony. And the corner view, which I have on my camera here, you can't see that. But you see that the corner view, as you see it from the approach to Market Square, has these equal facings of the south and the east of the tower. As I commented at the last meeting, which was a correction of the minute or addition to the minutes, I didn't see room. I didn't see that the arch in the tower anticipated a future sign or left space for it. That was with respect to the hanging sign. There's even less space with a wall-mounted flat sign. So in that respect, I think the hanging sign is better, but not really something to be done for all the other reasons that were brought up about the hanging sign. But with respect to what it does to the tower, the hanging sign was better because it was separated from it, it attached to it in a much more delicate manner. This covers a portion of the brick, the masonry, the continuity of the masonry from ground to the peak. And for that reason, I really can't support this direction. I would suggest what I suggested at the last meeting, which was also in addition to the minutes, which was to place signage in the void, in the window area, and respect the arch by centering it on the center of the arch, because I think it's wide open what can be done in the void. I think what's not eligible for doing things to it is the surface of this tower, which is quite iconic. That's my opinion. I would like to be positive, but I can't be.
So I was supposed to ask you to phrase that in a question, so it's my fault. Let's see if we have any other
comment.
I know. Let's see if we have any other questions for the petitioner or for the staff from commissioners. And
I had one little clarification. On window number 3, you have changed it from a plastic letter to a wooden letter?
Yes.
Great.
On both.
Great, thank
Great.
you.
Thanks. So let's see if there's it's an opportunity for any public comment, if we have any on this one. And I see no public comment. So now, Fred, I would like to carry on with your deliberation a little bit and talk some more about that. And I'm curious, because one of the things, a number of the things about the previous submission had to do with the color, and I think they've done a good job with respect to this wall sign, with the restraint of the color and kind of complying with the spirit of the signage ordinance in terms of, don't overwhelm us with the carnival. Just, let's respect that the businesses need some signage. I wonder if it would be more successful as a hanging sign, and I'm curious if you would view it such, if you took this same sign, not the purple sign, but the same sign, and then put it back out on the hanging, let it be, you don't think so, huh?
No,
You're shaking your
I
head.
think there are reasons that were brought up at the last meeting. There was, I think, a general consensus of that a hanging sign was not appropriate in Market Square as a precedent and as for other future hanging signs. And suddenly we have a lot of hanging signs in Market Square by having a precedent for it. And so at that point, I think the deliberation about what color the hanging sign that shouldn't be there is not a good discussion.
Fair enough. Other deliberations from commissioners?
I just wonder what the the solution would be, you know, in terms of a
Why
more
wasn't
visible
following
sign.
the art considered, and like Williams-Sonoma did? Was that just not an option, or did we not like covering up? I can't remember if there's anything substantial above the window that we care about covering up.
I think if it was below the arch and in the
Would you
void area, a curved sign certainly could be
Would you
possible.
like me to answer?
Sure,
Yes.
please, yeah,
But
thank you.
not above the arch.
The arch where Williams-Sonoma sign is, you can see from this photo, it's a much higher arch. It is not curved the same as mine.
The windows are
Their,
higher, too.
their sign is 20 inches high, and it is placed just above the keystone detail. I looked at the keystone detail on my side and measured up to the bottom of the balcony, and I only have 11 inches. So it would create this very narrow kind of strip, and it would not look good. That's why I didn't propose that. I also looked at possibly hanging my logo or my round sign within the arch, as suggested, but I would have to hang it on the outside of the window because those are divided, and I didn't know if that would be something that would work.
Well, I
So this
envisioned it
ca-
being outside the window when I was suggesting that at the last meeting, that yes, it would be relief independent of the window plane,
So
but
hanging from the
parallel
stone.
to it. But, I beg your pardon?
Hanging from the stone inside,
It could be bracketed out from the fenestration, from the window assembly. Could be bracketed out so there aren't hanging things. It could just be a relieved sign.
So Fred,
Could be.
are you objecting to the symmetry, the kind of breaking the symmetry of the base of that column? Is that the, is that?
As it turns the corner,
Yep, I understand.
the tower in question turns the corner in a uniform way. Each facade is like the other facade, and they're clean, very much like the towers of San Gimignano that Lucan fell in love with.
I'm not sure if you're
on-
escalating or going down from the Washington Monument, but.
It's actually the same thing. It's continuity of,
I understand.
each shares in continuity of surface.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's what contributes to the
It's fair.
iconic quality.
It's
Yeah,
fair.
it's, you know, I think it reminds me of the case of the awning color on the other side of Marshall Fields that we had last year, or year before, where we talked about the continuity of the building, and from an architectural perspective, it made a lot more sense to not have different, you know, color schemes and patterns on the awnings, and that as soon as we did that, I remember Fred saying that, you know, it just changed the whole look and feel of the building. You know, and I think how the commission came down on that was the reality is this isn't a museum, and there's balances. I totally appreciate the iconic nature of the towers, but there's buildings inside of these, and, you know, a building that houses a business has to afford some flexibility for the business to differentiate itself in the marketplace and to put out a brand. And I can see that there's not a lot of other options. Now, the bracket window option, I mean, to me, if I was a business owner, you know, it's kind of, it kind of limits you, and it's too me too to the other archway with, you know, the other side or the south side. So I kind of feel like we supported the awning that was a different color on the opposite side for a similar reason as to where I'm leaning here, is that there has to be some give and take, and I think there's been some concessions on color schemes and the hanging sign, and it's within the square footage allotted, and it does break the uniformity, but it is a commercial district with businesses and not a monument.
You know, I think, I totally see what you're saying, Fred, I really do. It is troubling. I just don't know what the solution would be to get the visibility that Mrs. Fellows is gonna need for her business. It's hard to say where a good sign would be, but I really appreciate you explored every alternative. You really went beyond to see what would be a good sign to fit here. And I'm just wondering if maybe it's just that white thing just staring at me, the frosting on the cupcake, that makes it seem like it's gonna really stand out so much. Maybe it's the logo. I don't know.
I actually think the sign's really well done, but I respect
Yeah.
what Fred's saying about it, and I actually think that having the two images of the towers reinforces the notion that he's describing. You know, you don't really see it so much, you know, when you're looking at it one, but I will say, that my knee-jerk reaction to it when I saw the mock-up was that I liked the blade sign better, even though not the colors of it, but the location of it. And I think it's because of this kind of thing you're describing, Fred.
I want to say I agree with Commissioner Preschlack that the business should be able to differentiate itself. So I don't think that's what's on the table, differentiate or not differentiate. I think it's how it's differentiated, and I think it should not be at the expense of the architectural character of what is there, and I'm referring to the tower. And I think there's unlimited potential to accomplish a successful result. As we haven't seen it yet, and I think that the void, it's really a wonderful opportunity because it's facing the train stations, facing the traffic, it's facing the entrance. It's actually a terrific opportunity. But the opportunity for me is in the void of the window, the glazing in that zone, not the surface of the tower.
So Fred, you would describe it as Williams-Sonoma's got the signage exterior of the arch or above the arch. There's room between that window and that arch, and so there's a nice
I'm not
comfortable
suggesting
sign.
that be replicated. No, in fact, I think it would be a bad idea
Yeah.
because you're now going to try to say the towers are the same, and they're not.
So you come below the window, come below the limestone of this arch in the glazed area, and you let the signage be script of some kind that's.
I think there's unlimited potential. I would not zero in and
Okay.
describe what your result should turn out being. I just think that's an avenue to explore, absolutely. I think anything that's within the zone of the window is something that could be explored, but it should be within the zone of the window, the void, so it doesn't interfere with the solid of the tower.
I did have a discussion with Megan regarding this. The signage allowance, and Megan can probably address this more than I can. There is no allowance to hang a sign in front of a window. It would be, in essence, hanging in front of those windows, correct? And I just don't know if, I would have proposed that, but I didn't think that that was a feasible option to cover a window.
Well, I don't think Fred's saying necessarily to cover it, are you?
This is actually a transom above the window, frankly. I mean, it's not in the window, that is at the pedestrian level. It's in that
The transom.
dividend space above the window that's arched, and that, I think that's, it's a part of the void.
That's
Megan,
there.
does the transom count as window
Right
space?
here.
No, not there,
You mean-
down here, anything here.
It's part of the storefront window. I would consider it part of the storefront configuration. Certainly, if there was a sign hanging in front of it, it would mask the divided lights that are on that window, and there certainly could be a solution that works there. But I think our sense was that manipulating the divided lights in that window, was altering what was there more than putting a sign on the wall. But certainly that's for the commission to discuss.
Well, I think anything that's done is going to alter what's there. It's a question of what you're altering. I think you can alter the window area, but you should not alter the surface of the tower.
I think this sign would be really successful as a blade sign. I think it's much more successful than the last sign we saw. It's more subtle, it's darker. I think it'd be fine.
Yeah, I'm more inclined to support the petition as presented here, so.
As presented.
Mhm.
I like this as a blade sign,
You might have another hung jury.
but not the other one as a blade sign, because I don't like it a flat iron.
Well, let me ask the petitioner, in terms of the satisfaction of a blade sign versus a wall sign, do you have a preference? Do you have a knee-jerk reaction yourself to that? Given not the purple
Would
sign?
it be this exact sign?
Maybe something similar, but it could be the exact sign. I think the one thing that you'd have to study closer is the size of it and how it's hung, but, not basically this sign.
I think either would be a wonderful addition, and either would be fine with me, wall mounted or hanging.
Yeah. And I tell you, I have come to have pretty strong regard for Fred's intuition on these kinds of things because we've had the benefit of that input in the past and not followed it and not been happy. And we're reminded of it all the time. So every time we see Fred and drive by the sign, so twice as bad, twice as nice. So You know, despite the notion of supporting the business and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, I'd really like to find a more satisfying solution to this. And Fred, you still don't see the blade sign as being any better than this, I don't think.
No, I think there's still a great opportunity without having to go to a blade sign, which I had, all the dialogue of our last meeting could be repeated now.
Yeah,
We, you know,
I understand.
the
And
next hour
so
and a
just to
half.
reiterate your idea, which is just one idea to explore, would be to let that signage be reinforced either below the top of that window like a floating letters in the transom area of that
Absolutely
window.
floating, independent of the surface of the
So
of the
that you
glass,
don't
not
mask
changing the.
don't mask the window, don't fill in the window, that
Right.
kind of thing.
Correct.
And then, you know, it's
In a
interesting.
sense, it's a hanging sign, but maybe actually a projected sign on some pegs, but not attached to the, or in the plane of the brick, and not in the fenestration, but out from it.
So
It's unique, and I think that would be unique from other signs around, but this is a unique position. And it's allowing you to have the presentation you want to have to the east and be seen and be visible, announce your business, which I think is great. But I think you can do it in a very nice way.
And so one of the things that's hard to see in this rendering, this is actually the photo of the mock-up, and then we've got at our desks the rendering where we have the 6-inch, the lettering across the band between the clear glass storefront window and the transom window. Those letters are 6-inch letters in this proposal, so those are already, you know, there's already quite a bit of signage, you know, noodles, yogurt, whatever it is, cupcakes, sorry, not noodles. So you couldn't have both of those. You wouldn't do a larger sign above that. Maybe the sign you're talking about would displace this sign somehow.
No, you might drop the present three
Put that back at the
words
bottom
low
of the
at the
window,
bottom.
back at the
I mean,
bottom of the
just
window.
throwing it out is how could you have both, not to lose something?
Mhm.
You bring it to the lower elevation and have the announcement sign above.
Because it's on the glass on the other facade, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, how do you think that relates to window number 2?
And could you throw that other one back up for us real quick? Thanks. This is helpful, actually, to have the two images. So.
Yeah, it'd be repeating that elevation, continuing as you turn the corner.
So the lettering is on the left window, you know, on the south elevation, there's two windows. The left one has the lettering on the glass, then you don't have it on the glass, and then as you turn the corner, you'd have it on the glass again low, and then
Low.
there's a signage opportunity somewhere high. I mean, it could be, I think it could be fine.
And the sign that I was referring to, among the possibilities would be that it has some transparency to it, that has voids in it. I'm not saying a grill, but think grill, that it could have cutouts in it, not be just a disc, you know, flat disc. It could have some openings within it to, again, give it some transparency.
Can I ask you a question? If you had known that that was an option or viable, is that something that you would have chosen over this current configuration to pursue?
I mean, honestly, I went into this next meeting trying to do exactly,
Yeah.
I watched the video 5 times
Yeah.
and took notes, and I tried to do exactly what I thought you wanted. I really tried,
Mhm.
because I just wanted to be done.
Yeah,
I mean,
right.
honestly, I can't represent, I will eliminate whatever is not approved, and just go in and implement it. I don't have the time to jump through hoops again and work all this out and hire people, you know, to do my mock-ups and, you know, my graphic designer to go back in and the architect, and it's many, many hours.
When are you opening?
Spent, and so I just wanna walk out of here with a definitive, answer. And maybe I can revisit doing something in that void in a year after, you know, my business is up and going, but, you know, working on the business right now is most important. And if I have to, you know, have nothing on that wall, I will. I just would like to move ahead.
I think that's what's really
Does that make
convincing me
sense?
to go with how the petition is presented, because she really did answer all our questions and respond to a lot of this. And it is something really different for this square, but I think she's really following the signs, and that's what I like about it. It's kind of different version of what the south side signs are above the businesses, following in the spirit of that Shaw kind of sign above the businesses, but yet it's a unique position because it's on the corner here. So that's why I'm inclined to support this. She's done her homework so much. She's responded to everything, and she's doing exactly something Shaw did, only with a little bit different take because it's on that corner. And I think it's really going to give her the visibility that her business is going to need on that corner, without being overly done, I think. The colors are muted now, you know, they're more Shaw-like, more like Forest-like.
Yeah, I think that's well said, Susan, so I support those comments.
Susan?
Mary Ellen.
I'm sorry, yeah. Who's you? Mary Ellen?
I think it looks beautiful. I
You
think
guys
you
are
did
setting
a
good
lovely
responses.
job, and I appreciate what you've done. But I see Fred's point. And I wouldn't mind this as a blade sign. That might be a nice compromise between the two. So, I'm for it as well, because I think it looks great on the whole.
For it on the whole, so in,
It's almost there, so I think, you know, I think I support it.
well, that's an important kind of distinction, because at the moment you have two
I know.
fours and two that are not willing to probably approve that particular sign, so you are the swing vote, as they say.
I support it. I
All right,
support
well,
it.
there you go. We didn't take a vote yet, but it seems like we at least know where everybody stands on that. You know, I think that, Fred, you have very, very wise comments on this. And I would say that if we do pass this tonight, I would still encourage the petitioner to think about how that sign looks every day when you come to work and whether you really like it or not. I do like it as a blade sign better than as a wall sign. I think that that has less impact on the architecture. I think maybe it could be hung a little bit lower, which would probably be advantageous, and I think it could also be maybe just a shade smaller as a blade sign and still be successful. So I wouldn't discourage you from continuing to explore that with staff. I don't know if anyone who is in the approving parties would be in the camp of supporting such a change were the staff to review that and the petitioner like it and suggest that they change what we approve. And I'm not sure if Kathy likes how I'm wording my comments at the moment, because I usually make her life a lot more complicated when I get creative. So maybe we'll just leave it at that.
I mean, I just think Fred said it earlier, we had a whole meeting talking about the blade sign or no blade sign and the precedent it would set in the square, and irrespective of the great job she's done in toning down the colors and synchronizing the design to the Shaw style, to Susan's point, it would still be a blade sign, and I think that's be challenging for me to approve. But I really like this petition, and I think it's fun, and for all the reasons that Susan had mentioned, I think it's a good solution. It may not be perfect from a aesthetic perspective and the continuity of the tower, but you know, this is a business, and it's not graffiti. It's, you know, it's a well done sign. It's pretty, and it's consistent with the other signs and styles in the square, and I don't think it's fair to put her through a redesign process when we kind of directed her and steered her to here and said no to the blade initially. And I think doing something more elaborate within the space above it seems to be a challenge, and just not the best use of resources. So I'm comfortable with the petition.
Fred, any other follow-up comments for us before we stop all over your objection? I mean, one thing, and Jim, I will have to say is that, you know, it's not really our job to design this stuff. And, you know, when we review things and we find problems with them and we point out possible solutions, we're not really telling them what to do. We're telling them that, you know, things that are worth exploring in our mind. You know, I think that the last petition fell down from my perspective because it had so much going on color-wise that it was difficult to embrace that, when we're trying to, get everybody else to have a little restraint. And so that's where I think the biggest problem was. I think it's, every proposal stands on its own merit. There's problems and opportunities on all of this stuff. A precedent, whether it's a wall sign or a blade sign, I guarantee somebody else will show us this wall sign someday and say, well, they did it over there, right? So I'm not too worried about the precedent from the standpoint of a well-executed solution. If there's a well-executed solution, it doesn't really bother me if it's a precedent. So I think this one, I think there's room for improvement, but I see that the commissioners are generally in support, so I'll ask if there's a motion.
I move we
Chairman?
approve the.
Yes.
I'm sorry, and maybe I missed it, but did you ask for public testimony?
I did,
Okay,
yeah,
thank
I
you.
did ask for public testimony. And no one had any.
Then I would like to note that there was a correspondence from the
Oh,
foundation.
thank you for that. Please
that
tell us
did
about
come
that
in.
really quick for the record.
The foundation did provide a brief write-up on this petition, expressing support for the various aspects of the proposal and asked for some consideration for the height of the sign to be deliberated by the commission, which you have been doing this evening. So thank you.
All right, I will now ask if there's a motion.
I move that we approve the petition as presented with the conditions listed in the staff report.
All right, so the petition has been, a motion's been made by Commissioner Athenson. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been seconded. I am just blanking out on Commissioner Swenson. Sorry. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Nay.
Nay.
And so that passes 3-2. Congratulations on that, and appreciate all your hard work. I know it's not fun to do, and I think that we spend an inordinate amount of time on two things in this commission, dormers and signage.
Yep.
And we actually prefer if you don't come to us and just work it out with the staff. So I also note that the staff supported that petition, and it's not a uniform rubber stamp when staff supports something. We appreciate their input and their studied kind of attempts to help us resolve things, but it's not a guarantee, and so that's just something for the record. Everybody should know that we are free thinkers some days. So, but good luck with the business. We look forward to the opening.
Thank you. I hope you'll all come and have.
We absolutely will. All right, our next petition this evening is consideration for request for certificate of appropriateness for facade and roof modifications at 441 East Westminster. And I'll ask the commissioners if anyone has any conflict on this one. And I see none, so come on up and tell us what you got.
Hi, good evening. My name is Jim Goodwin. This is my wife, Maureen. We purchased the home situated at 441 Westminster in February, and we've been doing just cosmetic changes, a lot of painting, and doing a little bit of molding work and discovering a lot of water damage. But one of the first things that we thought we would address was the back of the house. It's a Tudor-style house. It was built in the 30s, and in the 60s there was an addition done, I think through a permit, but it was to a non-historic, considered a non-historic addition. It's a flat roof with maybe 1960s undivided light, and so we'd just like to bring the house back. Make it more congruous with the original style. And so we're petitioning your consideration for a change to the facade and the roof line.
All right, thank you very much. So we have materials in front of us. I see you don't have a presentation this evening, so you avoided the signage trap. We'll ask if the staff has a petitioner or has a comment on this petition.
Thank you, Chairman Pairitz. The owners of the petition have described kind of the intent of this project. There was an addition that was built in the 60s prior to the establishment of the Preservation Ordinance and, of course, the Historic Preservation Commission. And it's really not in keeping with the same character and design of the original house. As was noted, the intent of this project is really to bring a more consistent appearance to that aspect or that area of the home. In general, staff finds the project to be consistent with the standards in the ordinance, with some minor comments about window proportion and maybe that this provides an opportunity to improve some of the proportions of the 1960s addition. primarily the window that's within the shed dormer. It appears to be more consistent with the size of the French doors and less consistent with second floor windows on the house. So certainly input on that would be appreciated. Commission is requested to provide input on just the overall changes that are proposed, the detailing of the addition, the use of railings on the windows, the timbering details, and provide some direction to the petitioner. I will add that due to the location of this addition, it does encroach into the side yard setback. So a hearing is scheduled with the Zoning Board of Appeals to discuss the change to the roof form from a zoning variance standpoint. Staff is recommending approval of the project this evening with a series of conditions. The Preservation Foundation also submitted a memo on this request, generally supportive of the project, the condition regarding the window, and then offered some comments on the railing detail that is proposed. An email, I guess, was expected. We found out from the owners an email was expected in support of the petition from the neighbors. However, we have not received that email in advance of the hearing. But it is our impression from the owners that the neighbor is in support of this project.
Thank you. And could you humor me? I see that we have an overhead projector. I have two exhibits here that I'd love if someone could just place those up there on real quick for me. Thank you. And then let's start with the picture there. Maybe, no, I can see them there.
Do you want to put the proposed?
Yep, we'll do that too.
Okay.
So while that one's up, if maybe you could just really quickly explain what we're seeing here. This is the existing.
Right, everything looks very good as you approach the house from the street. The problem is when you get to the back. So everything that we're proposing is only going to be really visible from the back of the house. You can see the addition we're talking about in the top left picture. The windows don't match. The French doors are sliding Pella windows that have expanded over time, and water is kind of leaking in. We've also recently had a problem in our son's bedroom, the little bedroom that's sort of tucked in the middle there. Water is starting to come down on the roof. So we're going to have to deal with the roof sooner than later. So if we are going to do that, we thought it's a perfect time to go ahead and gable the left portion and kind of recreate the house.
So Megan, maybe you
sort of
could
match
just
the front.
do a quick swap of those two exhibits that I asked you to do. We'll take a look at the proposed now.
And
Thanks.
before we go too far on the size of that middle window,
Sure.
it was kind of news to me, and we liked the suggestion. So we'd like to bring the window more in the same size and number of divided lights as the other windows. We were just afraid originally that it wouldn't conform with or comply, but
Oh, you always have to propose what you want.
yeah. So we like that. If that's
So,
what-
yeah, I think actually the middle window we're talking about between the two kind of balconied windows, if you will.
Yeah, actually, the left is a French door,
Oh,
Juliet
okay.
balcony.
Uh-huh.
The right is it's a higher window, but we thought we'd match the new with the old, bringing the balcony on both. But if you don't like the balcony on the right, we're not married to that either.
So in the upper left-hand photograph, there's a window on that right gable, below that right gable. Is that window just remaining?
Yes.
Okay, so there's no change to that window. And then the elevation where we have the French doors below and the new windows and the new gable, is that going to remain a sided elevation, or what's the material of that elevation going to be?
Stucco. Yeah, it's going to be stucco, and yeah, I don't think you can make it out, but there's going to be some timbering done to match the front of the house, which you can't even see the timbering done there because it's painted to blend in kind of monochromatic with brick.
There's no timbering here.
Oh, I
But
see.
very typical of a Tudor.
And there's timbering on the original part, did you say?
There is, you just,
Yeah.
sorry, that
Yeah, you can't
photograph
see it.
is, we're gonna paint it so it's highlighted in the future, but
Hmm.
it'll all match the entire house.
Yeah, you can see it.
But maybe in your drawing, you can see it.
Yeah, I think we can see it in the drawing. I'm just trying to make out where the existing timbering is. The existing timbering's on
It's
the,
only in the front of the house above the bay window.
oh, I see.
And it's actually above those two other,
That dormered section of
Yes,
the front
yes.
roof, the original front roof. And is the color gonna be consistent with that stucco that's up there on the back? Or
we're gonna paint the entire house when we're finished
I see.
reshaping it.
what color are you gonna paint it?
I don't know yet, but something where you're gonna be able to see the timbering.
I see.
That's there. I don't know why it's kind of a,
Is that fly part of the proposal? It's a good one. Well, I think it's a great improvement to the house in general. I'll ask if there's any other questions for the petitioner or the staff.
Well, I just want to make sure I understand one thing, and that the window on the back,
yeah.
above the back door, there's an existing window. Is that the one you want to put a balcony around? Is it this one?
So they're adding, this is windows, this is a true Juliet balcony on the new
Right,
windows.
on the new window
And
with
this is decorative ironwork to just mimic this
Oh, okay,
actual-
so that's not a functional door then, it's just a
No, it's
window?
windows remain.
And that's what Megan had suggested that they eliminate. So what do
Right,
you?
and we were even thinking, because we were gonna put a copper awning over the back door, and maybe it's getting crowded,
Yeah,
so we could eliminate it,
okay,
yeah.
okay.
Oh,
Yeah, so
Yeah.
eliminate this one. And,
I see.
okay.
Any other questions for?
Well, when you say you're gonna paint, you're not painting the brick, you're just
No,
painting the
no,
timber.
no,
Okay,
just the timber.
just wanna make sure I
Sure,
understand.
sure.
Thanks for that. Other
Mhm.
questions?
And then one question,
It's okay.
I just wanna make sure. And then I wanted to ask Megan a question about the zoning, just so I understand. Because they're not increasing the footprint of the house. So the zoning issue is the eaves?
The actual, the 1966 addition is located within the setback area. Because they're manipulating the roof form, that's work within the setback area, and that necessitates a zoning variance.
Oh, they don't grandfather them on that? Huh,
The new construction, the new work requires a zoning variance.
okay,
The setback actually goes through the existing home.
yeah.
I hope we don't lose the fireplace.
Is the fireplace new?
No,
Oh, okay. Okay,
That's a good thing.
yeah, that is.
I shouldn't joke.
No,
Yeah.
don't joke, but you shouldn't lose that.
Quiet, honey.
Don't let them take that. Other questions?
And one other
comments?
question. I
Sure.
just want
Yeah,
to.
that's what
was
that's
reading.
what we're here for.
When I was reading your email that you had sent to staff with your intent, you had mentioned that the windows were going to be true divided light. But I think, don't you
In
mean?
my mind, true, in the sense that you can't tell, so I guess.
So simulated divided light, right?
It's simulated,
Okay,
it is, yeah.
just wanted to check, because that was really exciting.
Go ahead, Fred, you got some questions? Yep. Mine are up there.
Oh, I want to see what's stuck and what's not.
So, Fred, in this picture, it's hard to, well, no, here you can tell. Maybe you cannot tell. In that picture, the upper right-hand image is all brick, except for that dormer section. See above the front door, that two-window section is a pop-up roof dormer, that's stucco. That's wrapped stucco. And then in the new proposal, the back would have that same stucco that's on the front, and there's timbering in that one above it too. It's kind of, that may or may not have been original, that dormer, that might have been part of the original solution.
Sorry, just to be clear, there is no stucco existing right now.
Oh, what's the?
There's just timbering, and it's all brick.
Oh, it is brick.
Yeah, we just thought it would be perfect to blend. In a lot of Tudor homes, we see stone, stucco, and brick all.
All right, well, that explains why I didn't remember any stucco.
Sorry.
That's okay.
I gave that impression.
So how does the corner turn at the chimney side? I guess that's the one, kind of, see if I understand that. So what would that be? That'd be the west elevation. The west elevation is brick now, or is it brick all the way
It is
to the
brick.
corner?
Uh-huh.
And I wonder if there's brick behind those, behind that siding on that south face.
You're talking about the addition?
I'm sorry, where those big doors are, I wonder if that was at one time brick.
That was patio.
That was patio.
That was all exterior. It was an L-shaped home with cross gable roof.
So where did the original brickwork stop on the west elevation,
The chimney goes all the way to the west,
right?
but then there was sort of a courtyard. So they just stuck this addition onto that corner.
Oh, it's this piece.
So they added
So
the
it's like
family
this.
room below and a sitting room off the master.
I see it now.
And a small bedroom
Yep,
upstairs.
I see it now, thank you. So that's almost in plain. Any other questions for?
So this is all stucco then?
Yep, that's right. Yep. Well, siding now.
But it will be stucco.
Right. Tricky little detail here.
Mm. Yeah.
All right, I'll ask if there's any public testimony on this matter. And I see none, so we can deliberate if we have any comments, suggestions, deliberations. Otherwise, I see you marked up in red the window in the middle, and we've talked about that.
See
So I
from
do
my
think
notes.
that I would encourage you to have a little interaction with staff on that one and try to make that, I think, a divided window that's not necessarily in the same scale as the door. Could be easily in the same scale as the window to the right, I think. And with respect to the ironwork added to the right gabled window, any other comments from commissioners on that?
Yeah, I agree with Megan, you know, keep the 2 windows instead of the long French door looking one and remove that railing above that window. I think it'll look a little bit more
Take
successful.
it out?
Yeah, the
Yeah.
railing on the right side.
Yeah, we did this.
Yep. Any other deliberations? I'll tell you that, you know, first of all, it's a nice little house, wonderful house. So, welcome to the neighborhood. You have a great spot that's across the street from, you know, a lot of amenities and near walk to town. So we'll go to your house after the train ride. The devil in getting this right is the transitions between the existing brick and that stucco, and so pay a lot of attention to that. Maybe the staff can help you through that a little bit to make sure if they've got any ideas on how those transitions work. That's the good news is you don't have to find a brick to match. So the bad news is you got to execute those details crisply, and the two that are really tricky are right at that where you hit the gable, where you hit that existing brick gable, where you have the roof leak right now, and on the west elevation where you're almost in plane with the existing brick, and so I could show you if we had it on the screen, but the roof of the gable wants to go lower than the roof of the roof of the 2 gables don't match up, if you can picture that in your mind. Matter of fact, Megan, if you humor me one more time, I will make you put one more drawing up.
Which elevation?
I have the west elevation in my hand. You can put yours up if you want. Or mine. And I actually wouldn't mind having Fred's input on this if you have an idea for us on this one, Fred. So this is the intersection I'm talking about, where we've got this gable coming down to the right, the original gable on the brick wall coming down to the right, and then you've got this new roof form that's extending towards the rear of the house that ends higher than that plane. And then the stucco wall there you go, thank you. The stucco wall kind of goes up into that little notch. So I don't know if you have any good ideas for us on that one.
Well, I just say, I think it's a very nice house, and I think what you're doing to it makes it even nicer. It's very, very nice set of proposals here. And then also, the second comment is, all of the changes are where the public's not seeing them. They're
That's
really
right.
personal to the owner, which makes me much less inclined to comment. It's not Market Square where everybody's going to see it.
Right, and if you do walk that property, you can't really see this side of the house. There's a whole line of evergreens.
And then the third, speaking to your question, Kurt, I think there's a number of eccentricities about the house and the way things happen around there, which I say just join the party and let it continue. I'm not concerned
All
about
right,
it.
good for you then. Any other deliberations? I will ask if we have a motion.
I move we approve the petition as presented. Again, another one.
So if you sit to the right, you get
Get them all, huh?
All right,
Including the comments from the staff to reduce the center window and remove the balcony on the east side.
all right, the motion has been made by Commissioner Athenson. Is there a second?
Seconded.
Seconded by Commissioner Preschlack. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And so that passes unanimously. Congratulations. Welcome
Thank
to the
you.
neighborhood, and good luck. All right, we have one more, I believe, petition this evening, and that is a consideration for a request for Certificate of Appropriateness approving a detached coach house and alterations to the residence at 950 East Westminster. This also includes a building scale variance, and I'll ask if any of the commissioners have a ex parte conflict on this one. And I see none, so please walk us through.
Okay.
Good evening.
My name is Tom Rajkovic. I'm an architect representing John and Anastasia Sfigos for a project that they hope to undertake at 950 East Westminster, a historic house that is known by the name it was given by its first owner, Bernard Eckhart. It's called Pine Wall. Mr. and Mrs. Sfigos extended their regrets that they weren't able to be here this evening. Mr. Sfigos' father passed away on Sunday. So I'm happy to answer your questions. They've encouraged me to represent them fully in regards to what we're discussing tonight. Next slide, please. When we were approached to work on this project, we've come before this commission for many projects. Usually, we find ourselves being asked, particularly to work on projects that have a sensitive historic context. This one is very much like that. The project was again built in 1907, and you have information in your packet that gives a more detailed history about it, but it was built in 1907 to 1908 by an architect, William Carvice Zimmerman, who was an eclectic architect. He did a range of styles, but this house is best characterized as being prairie. Jens Jensen, who was associated with Mr. Zimmerman on various Park District projects in Chicago, did the landscape work for Mr. Eckhart, and what you're looking at on the screen now is the original full estate plan, which runs from Lake Road at the far right-hand side of the screen, down to Westminster along the bottom, and the house, although it's a little difficult to see, and I don't know if this is a pointer or not. The house is positioned there. This property was subsequently subdivided, but this gives you some sense of what the condition of the house, Lake Road operating here. And this was originally a stable structure built in 1907. Later, a coach house, we believe, was built subsequently also by Zimmerman in a slightly different location. Next. And this, which unfortunately the illumination here is difficult to see, is a photograph from a book on the North Shore showing the entrance to Pine Wall from Westminster in that position. Next slide. The first thing we did when looking at the project, the Sfigos hoped to build a garage. The property has no garage structure whatsoever. And so the first thing we always do on projects like this is look at the context. Here you can see at the very top the location of what has been converted now into a single-family residence, a coach house that was constructed in around 1920, and the location that we're proposing for the new coach house. Next slide. This is a series of images of the houses that were developed around the site. The property was subdivided in about 1965. And so what you have is surrounding it a kind of an architectural history of Lake Forest through that period. Eclecticism ranging from modernist buildings to neo-traditionalist buildings more recently, and things in between. So you're seeing properties at the upper left, the house immediately to the west, across the bottom, the house immediately to the southwest, and the image at the upper right is the house due east. Next slide. Here on the top left, you see the converted former coach house to the estate, which gave us some clues a bit about how Zimmerman thought about such things, and you see an array of windows here that you'll notice a bit later. The structure on the lower right is the house immediately southeast of our structure, and then the lawn area basically due south, slightly west, which is filled with these trees. Next slide. And then other adjoining properties at the upper right, to the northeast, to the northwest, at the upper left, and then views from Westminster here back into our property to the location we're proposing for the coach house. And here looking back from the front lawn, which is actually part of Jens Jensen's original landscape, looking back out toward Westminster. The screening that you see there is primarily screening that Jens Jensen planted. Next. In looking at the context, here you see Woodbine. Woodbine is running through this location and then turns. Lake Road runs up across here, and along here, through that line, you see the situation of Westminster. This is the structure of the house, and the coach house is proposed for this location. Next slide, please. This is a diagram that we did to study its impact on adjoining parcels. One of the things that we did was we took the location we were considering for the coach house, one of the locations we were considering for the coach house, drew a circle that's 150-foot radius, so a 300-foot diameter, football field diameter, and essentially in that 300 feet, we come tangent to 3 structures. Oh, sorry. Is that better? So essentially, we contact, in that 150-foot radius, approximately 3 structures. Next slide. We then looked at what is really the only viable alternative location on the site, short of building something in the front of the house, which again would have interfered with Jensen's landscape. And it's in an area where Jensen's landscape exists, but we noticed that that circle impacts essentially 1, 2, 3, 4 houses, and finds itself in a position where the degree of landscape screening that we might be able to rely on between adjoining properties is much more thin here than the area through here, the buffer that exists between that and the adjoining houses to the east, to the west. Next. We looked at Zimmerman's architecture to try to understand the aesthetic that he used, and one of the things that he did frequently was this kind of quick repetition of window openings, clusters of windows, and also this sort of cubic massing. Next slide. Also this sort of tendency as a way of creating some sort of visual relief to use elements that were slightly more vertical in their characterization. This tower, which is at the Pulaski Park District House, and then that residence from Highland Park on the right, which has basically a series of windows at the top that make an overlook from that point in the house. Next slide. In looking at the house, it is an interesting and I think quite sophisticated balance of vertical and horizontal elements. Interestingly, originally, there was a balcony, long before my clients purchased the house 8 years ago, there was a balcony that ran across there that actually subdivided the vertical design of those columns into 2 horizontal bands. You notice the clustered groups of windows that I described, the vertical disposition of the tower that happens here. This is the view from the street, and this is the location toward the rear of the house where we selected to locate the coach house. Next slide. We looked specifically at details from the house as we considered how to make the coach house work most effectively with the original house, to be deferential to the house, but at the same time to use a vocabulary that we think Zimmerman would have used. Next slide. And so we developed, ultimately, this siting as the best. The kitchen of the house is located right there. My hand's not shaking, just the pointer's difficult to use. That's the location of the kitchen. Part of the point of this, obviously, was to create a proximity between arrival with groceries and other things and some ease of getting those things to the kitchen, to the useful side of the house. On Jen Jensen's earlier plan, an area that was positioned right here was called service yard of the house, and so in fact the coach house going there in this abbreviated size parcel seemed to make the most sense. It provides that kind of continuity of connection to the house for their use. The other thing that went into consideration here was using that to work with the geometry of the existing house so it's oriented orthogonally to the house rather than to the property line. That gave us the benefit of allowing it to actually sit, the wall of the house to sit about 20 feet 3 inches away at this point, even though its eave obviously works to the 10-foot setback at the uppermost corner. As we looked at the design and we looked at options for other locations, this one was simply the one that made the most sense from the utilitarian standpoint. It had the least impact on the original aesthetic of the house and simultaneously served the need of the family to get things into the house. We looked at connecting a coach house to the main part of the house and literally have it a continuous structure, but we're concerned that that would overwhelm the facade, and so the best location was this one. Next. These are images showing the location that we're proposing, the construction of the coach house. This is looking to the north, due to the north. This as well, looking due to the north along the side of the property, along an original sidewalk from Jen Jensen's landscape plan. And this is a view looking from what will be the driveway directly to the west toward where the coach house will be positioned. One of the things we studied from the outset was whether the structure could be done simply as a garage without any other accommodations. The client did not have a requirement for anything other than a garage when we discussed it with them. In looking at it, our concern was that the low slung condition combined with Zimmerman's tendency to use broad eaves, this kind of prairie school disposition, led to something that seemed much more suited to a tract house than to the house that had these very kind of demarcated vertical aspects of the composition. And as such, we rather quickly ruled that out. Next slide. So we looked at something that would both maintain that rhythm of grouped or clustered windows, what you're seeing here, and its relationship to conditions that happen in the tower. We opened the corner up with a loggia because the proximity of this, even though it's greater than the required 10 feet of separation for an accessory structure, was sufficiently close to the house that we wanted to have some breathing room there, if you will, but also we wanted it to have a character that would make it sympathetic to the rest of the house. Next. So the plans you've seen, I won't discuss them in detail, the car stalls, a stair, and a mechanical room. Next. Multifunction room upstairs, which essentially is for them to watch television. The house has a lot of very big, very grand, beautifully detailed formal spaces that are very difficult to relax and kind of live daily life in. The dining room has this magnificent wood paneling, but an informal space seemed to be the best use for this, given the importance of a two-story disposition for the architecture. Next. So the elevations as you've seen them. Next slide. In this, we simply want to show the condition, the point of this composition, this sort of asymmetrical composition facing to the south, was both to respect that kind of complex asymmetry that Zimmerman used on the facade, to allow this outdoor chimney piece to address itself to the existing sidewalk from Jen Jensen's landscape plan, and to work to unify it as a grouping. The other benefit that emerges from this, there's a pretty dense landscape cover in the back part of the yard, and so that area is often very dark. And that wall surface, because this wall surface of the coach house, because it faces south, will provide reflected light, which will help that area, the yard, be a bit brighter than it would otherwise be. Next slide. This is the view. This is the west elevation. And the next slide. The north elevation. In each of the cases, and Craig Bergman is going to speak for a moment about the landscape on the property. In each case, each of the parts of the deliberation, what we were trying to do was understand how to take an important historic house, allow the clients to be good stewards in terms of how they treated this addition to the property, allow them to have something that could serve as a functioning garage. It's a magnificent house, but it's difficult to have a house like that that has no covered structure for a garage, and make it essentially a place that's simpler and more appropriate for living in today. Craig?
Thank you, Tom. Good evening, everybody. One of the things that I was struck about the Svigos' project from the get-go was the fact that no one's come before the HPCs to do this, since the subdivision. For the Svigos' to be carrying groceries through their front hallway back to the kitchen for 8 years, it tells you that they're people that love their house. To a point of actually having their terracotta roof replaced, because they had to when they first moved in. And one of the things that I haven't heard anybody mention, which I think is a key thing to the landscape development of the property with the new structure on it, is that if you've ever driven by Pinewood or Pinewell and seen it, that roof is really green. If it was a standard garage heighted roof, that's going to be in all neighbors' view corridors. If you look at the house from Westminster, you see a strip of green. The higher the roof would get, the less green becomes apparent to the neighbors. So I think that even though the structure is brick, the roof is green, the neighbors that may have some visual issues with it, if there was proper planting between the building and the property line, and or if the roof is higher than a typical two-car garage, the green will be much less evident for them. The neighboring properties to the west and to the north have existing wooded sections as well as overgrown plant materials. So we're not starting with bare naked landscape on the other side of the 6-foot stockade fence, which I think is very important to show. Let me see if I can work with my shaky way too. Another thing that the Spigoses did, very sensitive to the original structure of the house, is that they did not impose a 3-car garage function on the garage. It's actually 2-car. It gives us lots of room around the perimeter of both the west and the north side of the garage to facilitate additional buffer and screening for both just inserting the new structure into a more mature landscape, but also to keep it in character with the existing plantings that occur right here. There's a row of 3 very large Norway spruce that are probably part of the original shield that Jensen put into high-bay cutting gardens, which used to be down by the wainscot is right now. The driveway configuration, actually, this circle is original to the Jensen plan. This arc to about here is original, and then it used to loop around to Lake Road. If we were to impose a coach house in any other part of the landscape, we would actually remove the remaining Jensen pieces of the landscape. And most importantly, it doesn't truly serve the function of the house. They'd still be going through the front door to take the groceries in. All of the existing plantings that are on this north border, you can change to the next slide, are in fact mature and quite tall. There's a section of old walkway here that the Spigoses repaired the remaining walkway. This is where the driveway would be. But this is the northeast or northwest corner of the property. Next slide. This would be the view of the garage from a distance. The intention is to provide additional buffer plantings, both for the Spigoses to just create more of a courtyard because there's a French door here, but also to create the large plantings to diffuse the view that the Spigoses have of the garage in the landscape as well. It's intentionally supposed to be nestled in a green landscape. This was the original brick walk that was part of the original Jensen plan. And as Tom spoke about, there will be a patio on the south facade of the garage. One of the things that I loved about this, and the Spigoses met me independent of Tom after they had hired him, and they said, where do you feel the coach house should go? And I said, there's really only one place, and it would be in that back corner. And it's because there's no imposition on the street view of this really wonderful house. And it looks as if you see it in the wintertime, the way Tom's designed it, it looks as if it's a portion of the original fabric of the house, which I think is key. This is that south facade. We are planning on developing a garden on either side of the walkway, which there was historically. Right now there's just turf. And this would just be a lounging patio. There's a raised terrace level connection to the back side of the family room and kitchen. So it's nicely transitioned, and there's a garden wall connection to the coach house here. And the Spigoses were adamant about not having a masonry wall here to connect to the fence, but to have a green planting. So this is that buffer zone that I was saying that we have yet to work out, because obviously we want to have a structure approved first, but there's quite a good distance of space, 15 feet minimally, with canopy clearance for us to put plantings in between as well. Okay. And this is a picture we took before the last snow. Where their garage would go is way back there, so there's no way that you could see it. You can't even see the house from this view. So it really is quite, even though it's in historic Lake Forest, in East Lake Forest off of Lake Road, they're our clients being very sensitive to the suggestion of putting it nestled into the neighborhood as distinct from imposed on it. Anybody have any landscape questions?
All right.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I think we'll ask staff if we have a report from that.
Thank you, Chairman Pairitz. The petitioners have done a pretty thorough job of explaining the thought process and the design rationale for this project. I think I'll spend my comments just providing some clarification based on some comments that we've heard from neighbors and outside parties. First, for the Commission's benefit, the Commission is reviewing the design and placement of the proposed coach house. They're also reviewing the associated building scale variance. Part of this request is, or I guess the existing house is significantly over the building scale requirements. It's about 49% over. Similar to other large estate properties in Lake Forest, this property was subdivided at some point in history and was left without a garage area. So this proposal serves, or this request serves a functional piece for this property to provide a garage where none exists today. With respect to the building scale variance, the conversion of the screen porch at the front of the house contributes significantly to the requested overage, about 650 square feet to the overage. And the remaining area is the living space above the garage. So that's the breakdown of the building scale variance that's requested. With respect to the setbacks, there are no variances from the setback requirements for this proposal. The structure does comply with the height requirements in the zoning code. We have received several phone calls about the use of the proposed structure, and I just want to reiterate what was mentioned today. It's our understanding that it is not intended to be used as a separate residence, that it is in a single-family zoning district, and the use of that structure will remain accessory to the main house. So I just wanted to clarify that. In the last couple days, we have been contacted by the neighbor probably most impacted by this request. I have had the opportunity to visit the property and view this proposal from the other side of the fence. And certainly the structure will be visible from the neighbor to the west. I think it'll be important for the commission to ask questions and gain an understanding of the proposed landscaping, what types and how high and how dense those plantings will be, to really try to mitigate some of the concerns regarding the view corridor from neighboring properties. We did receive some correspondence again from the Preservation Foundation. Their concerns noted the additional impervious surface that's proposed with this request. We did have engineering provide a preliminary look at the site plan, and it does not appear that the location of the proposed coach house will interfere with an overland flow area. So we have looked at that. The Preservation Foundation did make a note about the front entrance piers. As I understand it, that's not part of this request, but just for the record, the foundation did recommend that the entrance piers be righted. There's one that's in danger of falling over, so just a comment for the record. Staff is recommending approval of the project with the conditions of approval, or with the findings in the staff report. But I do think a better understanding of the landscaping between the properties is appropriate and would help our review moving forward.
All right, thank you, Megan. Now I'll ask if there's questions from the commissioners for either the staff or the petitioner.
Yeah, I have a question for the petitioner. If you could maybe just explain in simple terms the motivation for the project. I mean, what's really driving the proposed plan? I mean, in terms of use and function, what are the salient points for why this is being proposed?
The property currently has no enclosed garage space whatsoever. In approximate terms, and I think it's probably public record, but the house is about a $4 million house when it changed hands 8 years ago. And my client's expectation is that they should be able to develop the accommodation for cars at that structure. When they approached us, what they said is, we want to be good stewards of the house. They had talked to a couple of different architects. They wanted to find someone that had a sensibility that related to the particular challenges that historic properties represent. Those that are subdivided like this, where the sort of arena of operation is maybe more contained physically, and how do you accomplish something that successfully lives up to the character and the quality that meets the standards that the commission establishes and the city establishes for historic properties, at the same time fulfill those functional needs. So the process began with that. And then as we looked at the design of it fairly quickly, it became clear that a single story would be incompatible architecturally with the structure, and so that supplemental space that happens up above is something that literally evolved as a part of doing the design and making it appropriate and fitting to that structure. There was a lot of effort that went into looking at that. We also, one of the other considerations, and the owners were emphatic about this, and I think they'd already been speaking with Craig Bergman at the time, was they knew it was a Jensen landscape and they didn't want to interfere with aspects of that. So the function on the one hand was that kind of accommodation and proximity to the house so they could actually get stuff into the house. It wasn't just have a roof over the garage, but get goods and things into the house in a place other than a very formal, beautiful front entry hall. It's a long distance from that service end of the house. And those, I think, are the factors that led to how the design evolved. The enclosing of the screen porch is to make it essentially a four-season room. They enjoyed using it, but unfortunately, that porch at the south end of the house, which looks over Jensen's landscape and which constitutes a part of the bulk that number that Megan Newman mentioned to you earlier, we're not changing anything about the outside of it other than the screens are being replaced with true divided light, double hung windows that replicate what's in the main portion of the house. They just lament the fact that either because of temperature changes or other things, or rain, it gets difficult to use that, and currently they often mostly just store things there. They'd like to have a little more use of that because it's the southernmost point of the house and gets a lot of beautiful sun.
Okay, so if I understand it, I mean, it seemed like the functional use was the garage and car storage and then access, you know, to walk into a back door from car and go into the grocery store. And then the overall scale of the structure got to where it was because of the compatibility and in keeping with the main house and the historical significance of that and trying to be balanced. I mean, is that?
That's exactly
Stanley, is that what you're saying? So, I mean, in the grand scheme of things, it's a 13% add to the existing square foot that started for a garage and has gotten fairly substantial. And I guess the question I have for the city is, even though it was subdivided and it obviously didn't have a function that you needed as a homeowner, I mean, is there a bulk ordinance when there is a scale variance? I mean, or is if the horse is out of the barn, what regulates the sizing of these structures that take it from 49% over bulk to 67? Because that you know seems to be a fairly large departure, and I'd be curious what the city has in terms of guidelines to help us understand that more effectively. And then I would have another question to the petitioner about consultation with the neighbor to the west or the northwest or the north. As you designed this, did you talk to them about the structure, and did they have any hand in it or any discussions at all to just get their feedback? So there's just two parts to that question.
Two-parter, good luck.
I'll go first. With respect to the building scale variance, the ordinance does provide standards for the Historic Preservation Commission to use to evaluate requests for overage. When the house was built, certainly the current ordinance was not in place. But really the Commission's role is to look at each project and evaluate the uniqueness and the appropriateness for that project based on the standards in the preservation ordinance, but also from the building scale ordinance. The ordinance talks about mitigating mass with landscaping, placement not being visible from the street. The main one is being architecturally appropriate. So if that standard is met, then the Commission has the ability to evaluate the building scale variance and approve a variance.
And I'll just throw a comment in at the end of the Q&A on that one. We see all the time the building, opportunities where the building scale ordinance is a one-size-fits-all kind of thing, but it doesn't necessarily translate very well from site to site. And most particularly, it rears its ugly head when we see a neighborhood of very, very small houses and then all of a sudden one very, very large house. So that's the situation where the building scale variance helps us monitor and control what gets built so that we keep in context with the existing neighborhood. Context is king in this argument, and so here we have a very large house to begin with, and so the context of this house is intact, and the context of the houses around it are quite intact. Before you answer part 2 of that, I wanted to just see if I could get someone to tell me the distance between the closest house and this proposed coach house. Do we have an approximation of that? Is that 10 feet or 200?
That bubble diagram that we showed on the aerial view, basically go from the center point of the coach house, and it's about 20 feet, so 10 feet on either side of it generates a circle that's 150 feet in
150
radius.
feet. Okay, thank you. That's the exact, I just wanted to reinforce that. So part 2, Jim, remind us, that was the,
So it doesn't sound like there's an overall size. I mean, it could be a larger petition. There are no physical constraints to
Oh.
a situation where it's already over bulk.
no, I'd say that
To-
those are
just-
there's no absolute there.
Yeah.
That's in our judgment. I
Okay,
think.
all right. So I guess the second part was just how much interaction have you had with the neighbors that are impacted by the structure in terms of the design?
When we do a design for any project, we try to operate according to a principle, which is minimize the impact across the board. So in other words, if we were to go house by house, what you'll find is that everyone will want the structure or whatever it may be, particularly in a setting like this that's a complex setting, will want it as far away from their condition as possible. And obviously there's only so much one can do to meet that. And so what we did was we worked very much authentically in good faith to go and look at this site, assess what were viable locations in any way, shape, or form for a structure like this on the site, and then do our very best to design it in such a way that it would complement and combine effectively enough with the house that it would be understood or seen to be simply an amplification of the house, if you will. It's a separate structure, but an amplification of the house. So in other words, that it could be seen as something that is as acceptable and appropriate and fitting in that location as the house itself, given that the programmatic concerns that they had, the idea of creating garage structure accommodations for the cars, was something that on its own right seemed very reasonable.
Yeah, I guess I'm going to just rephrase it. I mean, did you talk to the other neighbors, or did the owner talk to the neighbors? I mean, sometimes we just like to see some neighborly collaboration, or at least discussion. I'm thinking of doing this, it's going to be in this area of my property, and here's the overall plan, and let's take a look at it, and I wanted to show it with you. Did that happen, or has that happened, or?
I do not believe it has happened.
Okay.
Other questions for either the staff or the petitioner?
Well, how do you respond to the screening, the concern for screening to the west? We don't have a landscape plan, so I really can't see what your plans are.
Well, I'd like to ask that question as well, and maybe Craig can answer that for us. But as you answer that, I do think that we should just point out, or maybe I should point out, I really appreciate the either-or kind of approach to understanding, when you were designing it, trying to understand what the options were. And we are in the business of making these grand old houses functional for modern living. We do kitchens all the time. We grant variances and bulk changes and things all the time so that we can encourage homeowners to continue to invest in these rather large homes, which need people to be able to use them so that they can maintain them and function in them. So appreciate the fact that a garage is a necessary evil of modern day life, and actually also appreciate the notion that you're not building a 5-car garage here. I'm sure that someone would think of that if you hadn't, so we like that. And I personally like the notion that the resulting structure doesn't look like a utilitarian structure, it looks like a continuation of the existing architecture. So I think you've done a really fine job of presenting an alternative that is in that spirit, and I think that's notable. Just the same, for the record, maybe Craig could just explain to us what your thinking is on the landscaping, not so much to be blocking this view out from, because this actually could be quite a rich and enjoyable view. It's like looking at someone else's house, and everybody can see someone else's house from where they are. So how do you think about the landscaping, if not directed to just put up a wall of arborvitae? How would you treat this?
Right. Well, the Spigoses are waiting to get a direction from the team, both you and the architect and the like, to determine, you know, what plans can ultimately look like. But for just the use tonight, minimally, we are completely in agreement that there needs to be some softening of the north and the west edge of the proposed structure. There are two, I would say 12 or 14-inch white oak that will come down because they would be in the coach house. But if you look directly west of the property line fence, and if you can see, the property line is not a straight line. You know, it's quite irregular at this corner. There is, as I had said before, this mature row of probably Jensen planted Norway spruce, and then there's a native woods behind here that wraps around the corner. I think that the people that live due west probably at some point over the course of the last 10 years probably moved all the common buckthorn out of the woods. It would have been a thicker woods before then. When you look at the quality of the trees that they have, they are mostly very similar to these trees that would come down for the coach house. They're white oaks that are grown much like telephone poles. They have very little branching because there was competition for light for the lower branches as these trees grew. So the best screening that comes for anybody from the west of the Sfigos' house or the new garage is the established evergreen screen that's on the Sfigos property. The woods itself, as I said, it's a perforated view. You can see tops of kind of a secondary understory, but there's certainly room to amend the woods with an understory, a native understory that doesn't exist now. I mean, as you all know, buckthorn, screw up the ecology of the woods, and if you don't replant an understory when the canopy trees die, you end up having a prairie again. So, or buckthorn if you don't take it back out again. So, my process would be to, in essence, create a shaggy, scaled amendment planting around the new structure that would be a combination of evergreen and deciduous. Because the entire property fence is stockade on the west and the north, we don't get any ambient light from the west. So I would not be putting Norway spruce or white pine or something behind the coach house that would be expected to conceal the lower portion of the building, because the fence will shade the bottom branches out and there will just be canopy up top. So we would use native plants like Australia, swamp white oak, probably white pine, some western arborvitae, because the deer don't eat them. But it would be a combination of plants, and I would think that they would start at 1 story and go to 2 stories high. If you were to look at the height of the woods in the perimeter, as well as the spruce, all the existing native trees in the property are taller than the Sfigos house, which is basically 3 stories high. So it's nice to be able to nestle a new structure in an existing neighborhood landscape that, by putting in something that's only 15 or 20 feet tall, it looks small, but it serves the purpose while it's young. And the reason I say Australia or swamp white oak is because they're persistent in holding at least half of their winter leaves. They're not an evergreen plant, but they keep the leaves on until the spring growth forces the leaves off. So it gives people less evergreen, but it gives them 3/4 season screening, as distinct from 100% screening.
All right.
Did that answer?
Yeah, thank you. It's helpful. Other questions for either the petitioner, the staff, or anybody else?
Yeah, I have a question just on the alternative concept study, because I think I agree with you, Kurt. I like, just having 2 different studies, and I think, the alternative seems to address the car situation and the walking to the back door with the groceries and things, and I was just maybe wondering if you could just talk about other alternatives maybe that you considered that maybe address some of the cons on the page in terms of just it matching with the overall scale and size of the house. I mean, is there a larger or just more refined, just 1-story garage concept that can meet the functional needs and be in keeping with the house architecturally and not be so large? Or is this the only concept that you thought of?
We looked at locations as much as the physical form of the structure, which is why I described to you that the possibility of its location to the east, and Craig had concerns early on about the Jensen's landscape there. There was the issue of the distance from the house, and so we were doing two things essentially simultaneously, looking at the form of the building as well as footprint locations for the building. And in terms of the form of the building, if we had raised the wall higher to give it some of the kind of vertical element, some vertical characteristics that the main house had, to have it complement that kind of balance of vertical and horizontal in the main house, our sense was that what happened was you just ended up with a lot of brick above a bunch of wide garage doors. And there's only about a 7'6" total difference from ridge line of garage solo versus garage with that upper level. And so the difference was not substantial in our minds in comparison with very real benefits to the composition with regards to, again, this horizontal and vertical characteristics that Zimmerman did. Zimmerman, that house that I showed you briefly that's on the property to the north of ours, was a coach house. We're not positive Zimmerman designed that coach house, but we think he did because it has some matching rain gutters and a number of details that are matching. It was then enlarged into a single-family house. And in many ways, it turns out that our massing is almost identical to it, except that our footprint is about half the size of that one. If you look on our site plan, the footprint of ours is actually about half. That structure likely was accommodated 4 cars or 3 cars, and then a bunch of additional storage space, maybe a gas pump or something that was then later eliminated. Are you able to pull that up?
And so how tall is the roof line on the alternative study? Just
On the alternative study, it's 16.8, 17, thereabouts to the ridge. And one of the things that we tried to do, I mean, we were cognizant of that as we were looking at the composition. The ground drops off about 2.5 feet at that north end of the property. You see it on that overall, the alternate scheme elevations. And what we're pleased with was that the ridge of the proposed scheme tucks in underneath the eave of that existing end of the house. So in fact, its height, the roof of the existing house actually sits up above, not this one. Well, I guess we can look at this one here. It's up here. You'll see that portion of the structure, not this, because this was added later, but that portion of the structure is what was a coach house to the estate. And you can see ours and compare that footprint to that one. One of the things that, as we discussed this composition becoming a 2-story composition versus a single-story garage, that I convinced the client to actually give up the 3rd car stall, which shortened, even with the stair, diminished the north-south length of the structure. So he gave up car accommodation, at least one of the car accommodations. They're modest about these kind of things, in exchange for doing a composition that would work better with the house. I mean, from the beginning, what they said is, we want you to do something that works perfectly with this house. That we love the house. They really do love it. They take good care of it, and so part of the objective for us was striking that balance. And you have a juggling act that you have to do.
You know, I think you did a great job in terms of balancing with the house. There's no question there architecturally. I was just curious if there was, you know, there's a large and there's a small, and I'm just wondering if there's a medium alternative, because there's always a spectrum of alternatives and choices. They're not just 2, right? And I kind of feel like the alternative is so diminutive in nature and so outsized that it just clearly supports the initial plan that you want passed. So I'm just curious if you had addressed just some of the aesthetic and architectural issues through an alternative scenario that's has a little more weight to the structure and solves the functional problems of not having a garage.
That alternative scheme that we explored, we actually did authentically explore first. And in looking at it, we were tinkering with how high the ceiling you put in the garage and just have it be a garage, and how much does that create that cubic sort of volume that really is sort of definitive both of the main house and the original coach house. And so as we looked at it, that's what led to that. In fact, as a companion to that, we worked with the minimum possible clearance for overhead garage door hardware and a relatively low ceiling, an 8-foot ceiling in that space up above as a way of keeping that eave line down as far as we could get it. So we looked at that and short of not putting a second floor in and just having a very, very high volume that would again have primarily resulted in a brick surface that was unarticulated under the eave, this seemed to be the best way to do both of those things and yet not have an excessively tall wall surface.
Yeah, you know, I have a question about that, because it was really obvious when I saw the two alternatives what the better choice was, and I can really see you studied that. And actually, I think the lower one, the second alternative, the one-story garage, really detracts. It doesn't really complement the original house, so I can see the direction you were going in. And I really appreciate you looked at that coach house and the row of windows. I mean, this is really well thought out, and keeping it to a two-car garage was great too. My only question was, you know, you want to keep that original house, you know, the dominant feature on the property. Did you look at the detailing on that? I mean, there gets to be a point where you don't want to detail the garage too much, because then it starts becoming, you know, less
Correct.
subordinate.
The windows in the kitchen, which are in this little inside back corner here, look out essentially, the best kitchen windows look out straight at where the structure is going to be. And so, other than imitating the eaves on the house, doing the windowsill that matched what was on the house, the place where we added a bit of detail was literally doing that loggia at the corner, if you will, the little balcony piece. The objective with that was because you have that interior corner, the 90-degree L, like the previous petitioner had on his house, his addition, that L-shaped configuration, by creating an equivalent sort of void or hollow, if you will, on that. The idea was to counterbalance that so that that proximity of the structure to the house didn't seem tight or close. It was a way of creating a little bit of relief between the two and yet let them exist happily. One of the things that we've done on other projects in these kinds of settings is recognize that it becomes important to work with buildings as ensembles. And we so wanted to, which is nice to work with Craig in that kind of regard, because he thinks of these buildings not as things that sit next to each other, but as things that group together. And so the detailing, there are elements that imitate the detailing on the main house, but not at the level of trying to sort of trunk the house, or even the little colonnettes that mark the loggia, the columns in the front of the loggia, are entirely simplified in relationship to the more ornate capitals that Zimmerman used at the portico of the house. So there is a calibration down on purpose.
Okay, good.
I like that you're not trying to connect it to the house. You know, that's fabulous, thank you.
The linearity of the house, and you see it in that image really well. The drive now, of course, comes up and sort of glances across the portico, and even Jensen, the approach drive, didn't come on axis with the house, but arced around, so as you approached it, you saw the columns of the porch basically in perspective and an oblique view. The idea, the only real option of connecting a garage would have been to have connected it here and had it make a big L-shaped configuration where the garage doors would face the street, but you would have lost that Prairie School, the sort of ship set sail kind of long linear structure. We would have lost that with an L-shaped configuration. I'm a big fan of L-shaped configurations. There are many houses here by Adler and Lindeberg and others that we've worked on that I adore that do that, but in this instance, Zimmerman's design really called for a kind of continuity of that plane.
Other questions from,
Comments?
all right.
Oh, I have one question for Megan,
Sure.
sorry. In terms of the bulk overage, if you took out the screen porch, what percentage bulk overage would, well, I should say, from, you know, existing to what they're going on?
I think the screen porch is about half of the added square footage.
Okay, so
I
you're
don't know
going
how
from 49% to 54%?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, be about half as much as what's proposed.
All right, now's an opportunity for the public to comment, so if you want to come on up, and please come on up and give us your name, and do speak into the mic for the folks at home, and we'd love to hear your comments.
My name is Herbert Prochnow, and we live at 949 Woodbine, which is northwest neighborhood of the property. I would not dispute at all the necessity for building a garage. It's obvious that the house needs a garage. The problem we have is the second story on the proposed building, and which really provides a residential facility. And we don't know what the purpose of that second story is, but I know there have been recent discussions about permitting broader use of coach house as residential properties in East Lake Forest. And that makes some sense certainly for existing coach houses, but if this were in effect a new coach house which was being built to provide third-party rentals, then that raises a serious policy question, I think, as to how extensive that should be permitted. If this is approved, and I assume it will be, I think there ought to be some kind of restriction placed on using that second story as a third-party rental residence. If that is an intention here, I hope it's not, but I really think that's a concern for all of us.
All right, thank you very much. Other comments?
Good evening. I don't know, I can't hear myself, so can you hear me with this?
We can, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good evening. I'm Tom Hunter, and I reside at 1090 North Sheridan Road, and I'm here to represent my parents, Maxine and Tom Hunter, who live at 911 Woodbine Place. Their property is to the west of the proposed new structure, and that can be viewed in the packet, I guess, that you've been handed out, what we've seen up here. And so I'm a little bit formally set up, and at the end, maybe I could add.
Sure, and maybe you could point that out for us, if the petitioner would just get us to that slide and highlight that house, that would be helpful. And actually, I'd love to know which house the.
It would be the one that touches the structure to the left of the red, of the yellow dot.
That house there?
Yes.
And can you point out the last
just north of
speaker's
that.
home? Is your home on this map?
Just north.
That one, those two. Oh,
It's just north of it. It's the one above it.
the one above.
They're right there.
No, no. No, that's us.
That's
Right.
Yeah, okay,
Hunter's is the one.
got it.
Right.
Thank you. It's nice just to help us with the context of the conversation. It's great that you came tonight. Appreciate that. Please carry on.
Okay, regrettably, the notice of the hearing was received by my parents Monday, and because they have their mail forwarded to them on a weekly basis, they apologize for the delay in preparing comments and questions at an earlier time. There had been no prior communication from the petitioner, so yesterday morning, my father called to enter into the discussion of the proposed new structure, and regrettably, as previously acknowledged, there has been a death in the family, so they weren't able to have a conversation on what's going on with the additions. In short, I guess you're seeing me here tonight because I'm the one who mailed the package in a flat rate box after accumulating it for a week to my parents, and suddenly the son was called upon, gee, we didn't get our mail soon enough, so in essence, that's why you see me here tonight. They couldn't be here. They apologize. Before I continue, I'd like to thank Megan for some help today, facilitating some last-minute information flow and visiting the site with me. With her help, most of the preliminary questions I think you have in the letter that came from my parents were answered, and in essence, it will allow me to maybe focus versus wander all over
Terrific.
the question or the discussion tonight. As a brief reiteration of the letter that was delivered to the commissioners this evening, the concerns with this project are not in the aesthetic design of the structure. It is a beautifully designed building in keeping with the historic character of the existing structure in the historic neighborhood. Currently, there's no garage structure on the property, and the desire to build a garage structure is an understandably acceptable concept for the property. So the basic concept of garage is not the issue. We get that. The petitioner purchased the home in May of 2004, and in January 2005, the Community Development Department published our 18-page building scale workbook. I tried to work with it, and it's complicated. The proposed project falls outside the scope of allowable square footage on the property lot. There was no garage on the property at the time of the purchase for a reason: continual subdivision over a number of years. The existing garage structure was subdivided and is located on Woodbine Lane at the top of the circle, right there. Yes, now. And because of all the subdivisions, basically that's why we're here tonight. I mean, the bulk ordinance and the historic area of Lake Forest were established for a purpose. The purpose of the ordinance: don't overbuild, don't overdivide. So, basically, here are the facts. The maximum permitted bulk on the property is 7,200 square feet. The existing home is 10,700 square feet. And I guess that's about, when we refer to 50% overage. With the conversion of the porch and the additional living space in the coach house, the scale becomes 12,000 square feet. I can't give you an accurate read on acreage, but it's over the bulk amount. Frankly, the coach house becomes the size of a modest home in Lake Forest, complete with 2 chimneys. We disagree with the concept that the reasonable use of the home requires an additional living space above the proposed garage. The idea of adding an additional family room suite is compelling, but in this situation, on this site, not as a second story in a structure that will make the new structure in further violation of city code and presents no hardship for livability. Now, my parents don't want a vertical brick wall with a height of 18 feet plus a roof line of 25 feet within 10 feet of their backyard, but if it was within the bulk ordinance code, they would have to accept it. Yes, additional landscaping of the petitioner's property might make it less intrusive on the west elevation with a 10-foot setback, but the actual height of a 2-story structure with a roof pitch makes it unreasonable to shield it with greenery from the primary view of most of the rooms in my parents' home at 911 Woodbine. But again, if the structure was within the bulk ordinance code, they would have to live with it. The dimension of the coach house is actually suited to 3 cars, not the 2 doors represented on the drawing. The space to access the additional living space replaces a full parking space. If the petitioner wanted a 2-car garage, they should have represented that. So, at this point, again, I'm repeating myself, if the structure was within the established bulk ordinance, my parents would have to live with it. Sort of under the pressure of brevity, I could talk about trees and all sorts of materials, and I'm not going to go that way because I think that you'll probably have more questions that come out with that. The variance is just too big. In the case for hardship, I don't really think that it's viable. At this point, my parents are not asking the commission to limit the conversion of the existing porch space into living space. They think that the porch space can and could or should be converted into living space. And while that in itself is in violation of the bulk code, it realistically is a part of the existing footprint, and the feasibility of turning it into a garage space with doors facing Westminster would not enhance the building, the property, or any of the curb appeal. Even with all the recommendations that we could come up with. In that an action must be taken this evening, my parents, lifelong residents of Lake Forest, that still call this their primary residence, are requesting that the Historic Preservation Commission turn down the building scale variance as presented tonight for 950 East Westminster. This request is for an existing structure that is already almost 50% over the allowable bulk. That's kind of my sorry.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
If I get my time.
You have? Do you have another comment?
I was just going to sort of make comment on the fact that I think that it's mindful that it's good that they have detached the building from the original structure. That actually allows them to put more bulk onto the property. And good, but it works to their benefit to detach it.
Yeah.
And while garage hardware and all the different things we've heard are good, I mean, it kind of comes back to the bulk. Unfortunately, that puts it in your lap to make the decision. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public comments? And it looks like we don't have any, so we can deliberate. I have a couple comments, and I think there might be a question too. So let's start with the use, I think that we would like a little more illumination on that. I think as we understand it, as it's written in our petition, a use that is not part of a single-family home would not be allowed here under the existing zoning, so it's prevented from happening. Any comment with respect to the consideration for the use of coach houses in the city limits of Lake Forest in the future? Do you have any words of wisdom for us on that?
There recently was a community engagement forum held by Alderman Moore to discuss that very issue. And the discussion was nothing more at this point of what are the pros, what are the cons. The city council has directed the plan commission to have the discussion about whether the use of coach houses should be permitted as a second living unit on property. And they looked at that from various perspectives, to provide a diversity in housing types, housing sizes, but also to encourage, as someone on the commission mentioned earlier, encourage investment in some of these larger properties and really make them usable. Many of these units, although this is a new unit, many of these coach houses were second units. They were chauffeurs or gardeners or others who worked on the property. My expectation is the Plan Commission will consider various factors. They will consider perhaps whether, well, first they'll consider whether the secondary living unit should be allowed at all, but they may consider factors such as when a structure was built. Should this be permitted only for structures built before a certain year? Should it be allowed only for structures that are set back a certain distance from a property line, or for properties that meet a minimum size? At this point, I can't tell you what all those factors may be. All I can tell you is that it is a discussion, and I expect it'll generate a lot of the same comments that you just heard tonight.
Thanks, and just to be clear, it's not necessarily the purview of our group to impose any kind of constraint on that use, is that correct? So
That's
even
correct.
If,
That really would go beyond your
okay.
ability.
So yet it's a factor for us to consider, but we can't, it's not our primary obligation, or can we impose a restraint on that? So, other deliberations from anyone?
I just had another question for Kathy or Megan. You know, in terms of contingencies here on the landscape plans, and it sounded like petitioner was thinking it would be a story or so, but I mean, what kind of follow-up, and would that come back to us if this did move forward, or how would we treat that?
The commission can direct the petitioner to modify their landscape plan to include appropriate plant material to screen high and low. I think it's important that the type of plant material that's chosen is appropriate for the location, that is a shaded area. So we want to make sure that for the long term, the landscaping that's proposed is going to grow and thrive in that location.
Mm-hmm.
So it's certainly something the commission can state either as part of a motion or for direction to the commissioner if you would like to see the plan come back.
Mm.
Other comments or deliberations?
I just want to reiterate what I had said before is, it was really pretty obvious to me with the before and after, the two alternatives, what the appropriate alternative is. And I understand putting a second floor on there will eliminate that need for a solid brick wall. I think that would be more objectionable than having windows on the second floor. The bulk to me is, the bulk overage doesn't seem that objectionable because there really does seem to be a functional need here. I mean, there really does seem to be a hardship. And the bulk overage without the screened-in porch, I mean, that's why I'm trying to look at it just by the garage. Yeah.
I think it's worth a comment too. We're not doing much math up here with respect to the bulk ordinance. We're not considering whether or not it's classified as an accessory building. We're not really weighing too heavily whether the screen porch should be in or should be out. We're reacting to a specific solution at a specific location and trying to determine whether it's appropriate to the context. So the staff does a lot of math so that we don't have to, but if this was not an accessory structure, I don't know that I wouldn't have a different reaction to the solution, I don't think. It's just, to me, it's the technicalities of the ordinance, and we need to understand them and we need to evaluate it, but I think we don't react to that as much as we do the designs.
Yeah, I think the context is key. You just had mentioned that. I mean, I think in the context of the site and what's best for the property owners and what's best for reinvestment for this community, if that's an admirable goal. I mean, I think it's architecturally consistent, and the context is just the site. There's no problem. I think when you start thinking about the bulk ordinance, you start thinking about weighing the context of the neighborhood, and you start weighing the context of neighbors and the impact of the neighbors. And if we were in those two houses or three houses, we would be thinking of this project much differently, and the bulk would be the biggest primacy issue potentially. And so I think there's two solutions presented, but there's really many solutions, and Fred often says that we just haven't seen the right one yet. And I kind of feel like, yeah, it's contextually correct for the property and the architectural consistency between the houses, but is it the right solution for the neighborhood when you're thinking of other stakeholders? And I do agree that the alternative solution conveniently doesn't look good, right? Because it's not the preferred one. And I think there's an alternative solution that solves the problem of the consistency for the large house and is more sensitive to the context of the neighbors in regards to the bulk. And that may be a 2-story structure, or it may be a 1-story structure, but it doesn't have to be one with 2 chimneys and 13% additional space. And I think that's excessive, and I don't think it's in keeping with the context of the neighborhood. So I'm not in support of the proposal.
Other deliberations?
I think once again, the damage was done in the 60s when this was awkwardly subdivided. And, you know, the homeowner is having to pay the price for, you know, no allowance for a garage, which is sort of ridiculous. I'm in support of it. I think it's...
They can have a garage, it just doesn't need to be 2 stories with 2 chimneys. No one's taken that right away from them.
I think the 1-story garage does the property a disservice. I don't think it adds it. I think it looks awkward and like a clumsy additional garage.
Fred?
I agree with Susan.
Well, I'm in support of this petition. I think that the issues that have been raised as concerns are legitimate issues, but I think that the presentation we've had of the proposal meets those concerns. The landscaping is in very good hands. We've seen the same landscape architect on previous petitions, and have been outstanding. I have confidence that what we've heard presented as intent will in fact be accomplished, and compliment the architect also, by the way. I think we seldom see single line freehand drawing anymore in this computerized age.
I got excited.
And the drawings are beautiful and very, very nice, but which is an expression of the design thinking that went also into the design. So I think you've done a great job. So I'm sensitive to the issues that have been raised, but I actually think it enhances the neighborhood by improving the value of this property. And I'm not a real estate person, but perhaps the increased value would extend to properties around it.
All right. Other deliberations or comments?
Yeah, I would just add that, you know, in good faith, I know it's a great landscape architect firm in person, but I do think we owe it to the neighbors with a view that may be impeded and a large bulk that may reduce property values. I think we owe it to them to put a clause in to see the landscape plan back here.
Well, so let's talk about that for a minute. I do think that we want to make sure that this is well handled. I share Fred's comment that we've seen very fine work from Craig's office on this. I think it'll be handled well. Let me just ask the applicant if there is a notion that there's an opportunity for the finished landscape plan to be actually shared with the neighbors. I think I'd love to see the staff have an opportunity to collect some comments on the proposed landscape plan from the neighbors, consider their input on that to see if they have objections. So we find all the time folks who live in houses have different points of view about the landscaping than folks who drive by on the curb. And so sometimes someone's looking out their bedroom window and they see a view that we don't ever see. And so they're interested in understanding how that might be helped. And I think for my sake, at this level, for this kind of detail, I'd be happy to cede my authority to the staff to arbitrate just sharing that information with the neighbors, collecting some comments, seeing if they could work with the petitioner to incorporate any reasonable requests in that. Does that sound like a process that might be workable to the applicant? I see a shaking of the head. What do the commissioners think about that? that sound like the
Yeah, I think we
appropriate way
need to
go?
address it. I mean, our other option is either put a requirement in that they add screening to the west, or ask the landscape plan to
I mean,
come
I think
back
the,
and-
the logical reason to have it come back to us is to make sure that the
The neighbors
neighbor
see it, yeah.
concerns are, do have a venue for, so if that last proposal doesn't resonate with you, that would happen, then maybe we need to see it again. But frankly, personally, I'm not convinced 150 feet away, this kind of scale, there's already a 6-foot stockade fence. I'm pretty confident the staff could handle that interchange myself, but what do you think? Yeah, I see a lot of shaking of heads, so.
Well, what about Megan? Do you think you could do that in your office? And
We can certainly work with the petitioner to facilitate a discussion about the landscaping, and also with the city arborist to review and provide input on the landscape plan.
Thanks.
And you'd be able to contact the neighbors and get their input too.
Correct, yes. Given the neighbor's concern, we can certainly facilitate that, and it wouldn't be inappropriate to actually bring just that piece back to the commission. You know, if the commission finds the architecture of the structure appropriate, you could approve that aspect with the condition that the landscaping come back to the full board.
Likewise, in the past, this is the kind of thing that we've done subcommittees on, if we wanted to treat that way as well. I think this is an opportunity to do it that way, although I always get a long view for the subcommittee idea.
I really do think, as Ms. Neiman said, that because you have neighborhood interest, because you have the hunters who are out of town, to allow us to be able to share that landscape plan formally through a mailed notice, give them the opportunity to share their concerns with you, it seems like that's only fair at this point.
Well, you're smart, Kathy, so we respect your opinion. What do you think, folks? Should we consider that as a motion? I see one more comment from the audience if we. Sure, go ahead, ask away. It's okay, you're the last agenda item, so we'll give you a little latitude.
We're going, that I understand. I do have a sort of peripheral question then, that if you're not involved with.
Would you mind come on up to the mic? And we have folks at home, so whenever we ask you to use the microphone, it's so that the folks listening.
I understand where we're headed tonight, and I accept that. But what I do have a question about is if you're not the one who is going to, as a body, talk about whether there are or aren't coach houses in this town, where does that fall?
Oh, sure, we can give you an answer.
Because I understand that you're
Yeah.
more the historic preservation.
Yeah.
I don't know if there was another step prior to this where there could have been discussion about a coach house. And again, it looks beautiful. We're just coach house versus non-coach house, what the direction of the city is, and how do we communicate or talk about that?
We can answer that question. It's with respect to the building of any structure in the historic district, we are the body that gets to determine if we think that it's in context and in character and preserves the character of the city of Lake Forest. I read a whole thing on it, actually. With respect to the use is basically through ordinance, and so that would be considered by the zoning committee and city council,
By the plan commission.
plan commission, excuse me.
And what I was gonna suggest is, as that discussion about uses, today, this coach house, if approved and if built, cannot be used, the current code does not allow it to be used as a second residential unit on the property. What I think would be appropriate is that because of this issue, because you, your parents, and the other neighbors have raised concerns, we will add you to the interested parties list, so when the plan commission does have a discussion about coach houses and secondary residential uses generally, we will make sure that you get notice of that discussion, and play a role in identifying those parameters. And again, perhaps a parameter is that, that this change in the code, if it moves forward, is intended to support historic coach houses. So it may be that coach houses built prior to a certain year, but you would all have an opportunity to weigh in on those parameters.
Regrettably, the ship will have sailed by then. If we're included on future discussions versus the actual discussion at hand.
Well, that would not be a conversation that would dictate whether or not they can be built. It's a conversation that dictates how they can be used. So right now, it can only be used by the residents of this home for their own use. So it's a nice place for a second office, if you will, something like that. It's not designed to be an apartment for someone to live in. Okay? All right, thank you. Can I get a motion?
Go ahead.
Can I get a motion?
Okay. Well, what do we decide on the landscaping plan?
I
Are
think
we gonna
that,
bring it back?
bring it back.
Okay. I move that we approve the petition as presented with the condition that the landscape plan comes back to the board for review.
Okay, so the motion has been made by Commissioner Athenson. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Commissioner Moyer. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
And opposed?
Opposed.
One opposed, so that passes 4-1. Thank you very much. It's a great project. I hope you're sensitive to your neighbors. I see a question. Please.
Since my plan has to come back to you, much like Mrs. Swenson had mentioned, subdivision was a disfavor to this wonderful house. Does the city give us allowance to work on the other side of the fence in the landscape plan? Because right now, we're very limited to the amount of plant material, like Megan had mentioned, because of the setback. We have 10 feet, we have 12 feet.
Well, I could answer that question from not the official point of view of the city staff, but the guy who gets to grade it. It would be wonderful if you could work with your neighbors, and if that were helpful to them, if they thought that that was a good solution and they wanted you to amend part of the landscape on their property, and that was worked out technically satisfactory with the city, we'd encourage you to do that. I think that'd be.
I can't speak for the Spigos as what they're willing to
Yeah.
pay for, but I think it would be a better solution to the original property.
Yeah, because you get a bigger area to transfer.
And then the plants will be healthier.
So we like that solution from I'm speaking for everybody now, but I think that, we would applaud that approach. Technically, you have to work that out with the staff and the neighbors.
All right, I don't want to be accused of,
Yeah. And if it can't happen, we wouldn't hold that against you, but I think that that's a nice, could potentially be a nice gesture. Also, I think
Tell
that.
your parents, please, that I'm suggesting to landscape by taking the fence down, coming in from the Spigos property and not damaging your parents' woods. In other words, come from the east, come from the south property line of you folks that.
So that you don't have to perform
So we don't
construction in their
damage
yard. Yeah.
From Woodbine
Yeah.
to the back.
Well, we'll leave the details in the opportunity to you folks to work out, but I think that that's
Just
not
want
a.
everybody know that I'm a team player on
Yeah.
this.
Thank you. We know you are. It's a wonderful solution architecturally, and I'm sure it's going to be nice. I hope that the use issue does not crop up in the future as being a problem for these neighbors. I certainly respect that as a concern, and I would, be disappointed if that were to be an issue for them in the future. So. All right, any other issues? This is the opportunity for the public to address the HPC on non-agenda items, if we have any such things. And I see none of those, and so I'll ask the staff if they have any other announcements or additional information for us. And I see none of those, so I'll look for a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
So moved by Commissioner Preschlack. Do I have a second?
Second.
By Commissioner Moyer. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
And that passes, so good evening, and thanks for coming this evening.